Hello fear seekers, and welcome back to the channel. When people hear a call to adventure, they often daydream about distant, faraway lands and places. But what if I were to tell you there is adventure to be had in even the most run-down and dilapidated of locations, and that, oftentimes, they can be found only a stone's throw from home? Today, we're going to be diving into some creepy, allegedly true, urban exploration horror stories. Now, it is a dream of mine to read subscriber horror stories someday. With that in mind, I'd ask that you subscribe to the channel and like the video so we can make that happen together. If you have any scary stories from your own life, feel free to submit them to the email in the description. I would be honored to read them. Now, without further ado, sit back, ignore the unshakable feeling of habitation in these deserted halls, and get ready to ferment your fears. I've been doing urbex, urban exploration, for years, and nearly all the places I've been are spooky simply because it's dark and they could be inhabited by squatters. I've encountered a few unexplainable things, though. Probably the best example I have is of a very odd abandoned house. This story spans more than a decade. It was a two-story home, probably from the teens, surrounded by tall trees and brush. It stood alongside a two-lane road, not near any other houses. There were three ways to see it from the street. If you pulled off in a gravel turnout across the street, you could see the top of the roof. If, while in this turnout, you aimed at the right angle, you could see over the metal farm gate, up a tunnel of trees/shrubs, and up the driveway. Or, if you went about 100 feet down the road and looked back, behind the wall of trees you could see a gable and an upstairs window. A friend told us about it in 2000. We went at night, and when we shone a flashlight up at said gable, it looked like there was something white swaying to and fro in the window. On a subsequent visit, one person brought one of those spotlights that's reputed to put out 1 megacandela, 1 million candle power, and we used that to light up the gable. Sure did look like a white circle was bobbing in there. Next move was to bring binoculars. Now it gets odd. While using the big spotlight, all viewing the site with the naked eye could see the motion, but whoever used the binoculars only saw a dark, empty window with the glass missing. We got our group together and decided to go in. The gate had a padlock and chain, but we brought bolt cutters. The moment we cut the chain, the house briefly flashed white. We love spooky stuff, so we went in anyway. Couldn't access the front door due to brush, but we could get to the cellar door on the side and the back door. One corner of the living room was collapsing, with floor, wall, and ceiling all sinking. The inside was trashed and extremely weather-beaten. There were papers and books everywhere, lots of 1970s Christian homeschooling and Bible lessons. The window mentioned above looked into the upstairs hallway, was 10 feet above a staircase landing, and had no curtains or anything else which could account for the moving white thing we saw. The cellar had an old lawnmower and a lot of fruit in glass jars. One of our group, Gene, was a drama queen known for making up stories, and he claimed a demon attacked him in the cellar. But this sort of thing was normal fare for him. He later claimed he went back and found all the floorboards in the attic pulled up and nailed haphazardly to the ceiling. None of the rest of us experienced anything scary or unexplainable in the house. We called it explored and left it to rot. Then, around 2012, a new friend wanted to explore a house, and I suggested that one. We went over by day, parked, and were eyeing the gate when an SUV pulled up. The driver was a middle-aged guy. The passenger, a woman, never spoke. He talked to us in a slightly drawn-out, sing-song, almost teasing tone, saying, "You're not thinking of going in there, are you?" I replied that we were just looking, but wanting to put off any suspicion, told him that maybe we'd better ask its owner first, and asked if he, an assumed local resident, knew how we could contact them. He replied in the same manner, "That might be difficult," flashed a sort of odd smile/smirk, then drove away very slowly. We were pretty weirded out, and we left. About a year later, I was out riding around at night with another friend and a guy he had visiting from out of town. Said visitor had said, "I don't think I'm sensitive, but my friends say I am." So we took him to several local spots that we thought were spooky. This one was among them. When we pulled a U-turn in the turnout, the driver aimed his headlights towards the house, and the visitor was suddenly overcome by nausea. We left. A month or so later, I took another friend, a hardcore skeptic, there at night. The front gate had acquired a new "no trespassing" sign and a shiny new chain and padlock. It was easy to see the house from the turnout, as it was white and the moonlight was reflecting off, giving it the appearance of glowing. I hadn't seen it under moonlight before, and it looked cool. We got out, and realized there was no moon. It was an overcast night. Again, we left in a hurry. There really did seem to be something ominous about it from outside the fence, but during the 2000 visit, there seemed to be nothing odd about the place once we were inside the property. Then, at a social event I attended weekly, a guy I met claimed to be part of a group of demon hunters. I told him about the house. He wanted to see it. We drove out that night. It should be noted that the area has thick brush and trees along both sides, and unless you know there's a house back in that one spot, especially at night, there's no signs that a building is or isn't hidden anywhere along there. We were approaching, and just as we passed the very beginning of its property, but before I could say, "Turn off here," he slammed on the gas. I asked why, and he said, "Bad, bad. I don't know what, but back there on the left, there's something very, very nasty." That was where the house stood. A week or so later, I had a very unusual dream in which I saw a fascinating creature, and I had a pretty clear idea of what it was and what the dream meant. It had nothing to do with the house. A few days later, I arrived around midnight, as did the so-called demon hunting team. I had also invited 2 friends, who hadn't been to this house but were interested to see it. The leader of the team immediately began rubbing me the wrong way. She spoke highly of herself and gabbed about her amazing and powerful abilities at banishing evil beings. Just to see what she'd say, I asked if she could interpret dreams, then described the one I'd had. She insisted that what I saw in it was her, coming to ask me for guidance in going through this house. I quietly laughed. This time, the driveway was so overgrown that we were unable to go in that way. Some members tried digging through the forest to get in from the far side of the property, found a way in, and the team entered without me. Sometime later, my friends arrived, and a member of the team climbed out and showed us the way in. From this direction, we passed a small greenhouse, in which someone had assembled the stuff necessary to cook meth but hadn't begun. Also new, we were unable to reach the cellar or back doors, but could go in the front. The house hadn't changed a great deal. The living room's front corner was still collapsing. The books and papers were a bit more moldy. This time, I had a camera. The leader of the group told me that ghosts and spirits gravitate towards her, and that if I snapped a shot of her sitting on the staircase, I'd see all sorts of crazy stuff. The photos, which I unfortunately lost in a hard drive crash, had nothing anomalous that I could find. I was also able to disprove Jean's claim about the attic floorboards being nailed to the ceiling. We all climbed back out and left. The house has since been razed, though there's still a chained gate and a no trespassing sign. I haven't been back, but maybe I should go. I've seen and experienced a few other strange things, but in most of the places I visit, they're just empty and cold. I drove by today. The lot is cleared, but the wall of trees and brush still surrounds it. The gate is still chained and locked, and has both no trespassing and private property signs. Hi. So this story takes place around the time of the housing crisis back in 2008 or so. I was in high school at the time. A buddy, I'll call him Eric, and myself would do some urban exploring by sneaking into empty, abandoned/foreclosed homes. Of course, we do these explorations in the dead of night to avoid any trouble with the law. I can't give away the location because people now live there, and I have no scientific rational explanation for what happened, but I know what I saw and heard, so I'd like to share it with you all. So we set out around 12 AM just like we would any night. About an hour or so in, we find a house that I often saw on my walks to school. As we walk up to the house, we scan for anyone, then we make our way down the large driveway that leads into the backyard of the house. The first thing I noticed is how tall the grass was, like it hadn't been mowed in quite some time. Months, I'd say. Then I noticed a smaller house further near the back of the property. We told ourselves we'd check that house out once we've explored the bigger one. We entered the bigger house from the door that leads into the garage, and from the garage we stepped into the kitchen. Believe it or not, the doors were unlocked. When we entered the kitchen, we see the house was almost pitch black. We can only see a few feet ahead thanks to the streetlights, so I used my only light source at the time, a cheap flip phone with the screen brightness on max. We start our exploration down the hallway and check out each room. 5 in total, counting the 2 living rooms. Eric is close behind me as we make our way through each room and eventually back to the kitchen. Once in the kitchen, we chat about how nice the house is and its size given the area it's in, much bigger than the surrounding houses. As we're talking, I notice a metal decoration hanging above the kitchen doorway. It almost looked like some sort of decorative shield. I pull it from its spot and inspect it closely. Once done, I can't figure out how to put it back, so I set it between my feet on the tile floor. I take a look at my friend and take a step into the kitchen. Then we both hear what sounds like something sliding along the floor and then a bang at the end of the hall. Eric and I both freeze and stare at one another through the streetlight shining through the kitchen window. Eric whispers to me, "Is there someone here with us? Did someone follow us in?" I honestly didn't know, but after a minute or two, we decide to walk down the hall and see what the noise was. As my phone light creeps down the end of the wall, we see the shield I had just pulled down. We were both relieved and I thought, well, maybe I kicked it when I stepped and didn't notice. I picked it up and this time I figure out how it needs to be attached to its original position. Once again I look at Eric and take a step towards him and hear a few clangs on the floor and that familiar sliding sound across the floor and the bang against the wall. Now we're really scared and frozen, not moving for what seemed like forever. Then an even louder bang is heard at the other end of the house and we both jump and stare into the dark hallway. Then again, bang, and then quiet, then 3 more rapid bangs. Someone was thrashing around in the very last room in the house, and we didn't know what the hell to do. Determined not to let this person scare us, we run towards that last room and confront this person. When we get there, nothing. No one. The room was empty. But how? Who? We were sure it was coming from this room. There's no way whoever it was slipped by us. The room had a sliding glass door leading into the backyard, but it was locked from the inside. Then before we can gather our thoughts and ask each other what was happening, bang, 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 this time from the kitchen. Scared out of our minds, we both agree it's time to leave. We make our way through the back door in the room and finally to the street, all the while checking over our shoulders to ensure no one was going to come running out of the house after us. No one came and the neighborhood was quiet. Eric and I start our walk home, talking about the house, when Eric notices his pocket knife is missing. He then turns his pockets inside out to show me he isn't joking. We stop and he keeps telling me how we have to go back for it since it's his favorite one. Frustrated, I asked him, "How did you lose it if it's your favorite knife?" He assures me he never removed it from his pocket and has no idea how it could have been removed from his pocket. I agree to go with him and find it. We make it halfway up the street when Eric tells me his back feels like it's on fire. I can see it's really bothering him because of the expression of pain on his face. He asks me to lift his shirt and look at what could be causing the burning sensation. I lift his shirt and quickly notice 3 very large scratches, starting from his right shoulder blade going all the way down to his left hip, then from his left hip across his right hip. I tell him this and he immediately says the house is haunted, but he still wants to get the knife. I'm scared, but I'm not going to let him go alone. So, we make our way back into the house and immediately hear that banging noise, but we made a pact with each other that we would not run no matter what happened. We begin our search for the knife, looking high and low, all while hearing banging, and now things are being thrown across the room. Of course, I'm frickin' scared out of my mind, and I want to leave. But we haven't found the knife yet. We do one pass through the entire house and end up in the kitchen. In the kitchen, there is an entrance to the second living room that you can see from the backyard. In that room, there is one piece of furniture, a hutch. Now we had already checked this room since it's near our point of entrance and found nothing, but we decide one more pass through the room would not hurt. I make my way into the dark room and let my light lead me to the hutch. And there it is. On the hutch, we found the knife. But for sure, we checked this room and the hutch. He didn't hesitate for a moment. He grabbed the knife and we hightailed it out through the garage and back onto the street. This is far from the end of the story, but to summarize, this house is messed up. The rest of the story includes shadow figures leaping from the bushes, dozens of light bulbs shattering at once, and a knife jammed deep into the front door of the home. We make our way to our homes, but the entire week we would talk about the house and what was going on in there. We brushed it off and didn't believe it. There had to be some explanation, so we went back. But we bring 3 friends with us because they wanted to see this haunted house Eric and I wouldn't shut up about. While walking through the backyard, I can't explain it, but for some reason I wanted to get a closer look at the back house. I start making my way towards the house, but I start to feel scared. A feeling of dread came out of nowhere. I turn away from the house and start my way back to the group, but out of the corner of my eye I saw something leap from the bushes. Some dark figure had leaped from the bushes and into the tall grass, but when I gave it my full attention, it was gone. I stared at the bushes for a moment a little confused, but I brushed it off. I did mention it to the group when I caught up with them, but it was quickly dismissed. We entered through the garage door. This time we noticed a white bookshelf full of light bulbs in the garage. The bookshelf was probably about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, and completely filled with packaged light bulbs. We study it for a moment and make our way into the kitchen, with Eric leading and me in the back. I enter last and shut the kitchen/garage door behind me. As soon as I release the doorknob, we hear what sounded like someone in the garage breaking all the light bulbs on the bookshelf. Stunned, I remember my heart beating a mile a minute, waiting for whatever the hell it was to start trying to fight its way into the kitchen. But nothing came, and Eric finally said, "Damn, I guess we're not going back now." We make our way to the very last room in the house, the same room Eric and I had exited through the last time we were there. Whatever it was did not disappoint. Random objects were being thrown against the wall in front of us. We could hear loud banging all throughout the dark house, like there were people fighting in the damn house. One of the friends decides he's had enough and opens the glass door to the backyard, and 4 of us start making our way through the backyard. I turn around to wait for Eric. He was not moving, caught in a daze, standing in front of an unhinged door that was propped against the wall for support. Eric was staring down the hallway as if waiting for something. I had to call his name 3 times before he realized we were leaving. He stepped forward, and before my eyes it looked as though someone tried to throw the unhinged door on top of him. Eric jumped out of the way and started towards me, scared out of his wits. The other 3 are already almost to the street, so we both just keep the pace and catch up with them. As soon as we reached the street, one of the friends kept telling us how messed up that house was. You can see the look of terror on his face as he expressed his feelings about the place. He then mentions a burning feeling going up his calf. Sure enough, he's got those messed up scars starting from his ankle and stopping midway through his calf. Just before we split up to go home, the 3 of them swear off that place, and that was the last time those 3 friends spoke to us. We ended up going to the house a few times after that, but nothing absolutely memorable happened. We heard the knocks and the bangs and whatnot. It wasn't until we took Eric's, I'll call him Derek for clarity and privacy obviously, older brother, that it got crazy. By this time, we visited the house a few times, and become numb to the banging and throwing. We found it more amusing than anything, like, check this place out, it's haunted. This time, it got more aggressive. After touring the house and seeing Derek freak out, we decided to have a chat in the kitchen. I was standing in front of the window, leaning against the windowsill. Eric was to my right, leaning against the wall, and Derek was standing across from me in front of the doorway that leads into the second living room I mentioned earlier. We talk about how scary the house is and all that. Derek turned around to check out the living room behind him. I mentioned to him that that's the hutch we found Eric's knife on after running around the whole house searching for it. As he turns to face me, Derek fell into the room, almost like something pushed or dragged him from behind. I remember looking at his face and seeing a look of terror as he tried to grab on for dear life to the doorway, but the push/pull was too strong and he fell on his ass into the room, but immediately jumped up and ran over to me. He grabbed me by my shirt and started screaming at me, "Yo, what the hell is your problem? Why did you push me?" I just kept telling him that I didn't push him, and Eric jumped between us and confirmed what I was saying. "He didn't push you. You fell in." Derek explains that someone or something pushed him in. After that, he obviously wanted to leave, so we all agreed, but before we leave, Eric and I both told Derek to check his pockets to see if anything was missing. Of course, his pocket knife is missing. But it's okay. We found the last one, we'll find this one, right? Searched the whole house. Nothing. As expected. Now it's time to check the hutch. First pass. Nothing. Second pass. Nothing. Third? Nothing. Okay, now this knife is really gone. Derek wants one more pass through the house. We agree. We make it to the far room with no luck. We started making our way back to the kitchen with me leading. As I'm coming up to the kitchen, my cell phone light starts to reflect off of something shining in front of the door that leads into the front yard. It was the fricking knife, jammed deep into the door. There was no way that knife could have been jammed into the door without any one of us hearing it. Derek takes his knife and we leave. I never went back after that. Out of all the BS that went down in that house, that was the not welcome sign I took seriously. And that's it. That's everything I can remember. Eric moved not long after that, and I moved away at the end of 2009. Haven't seen the house since, except when I tell the story to friends, I'll pull up the house on Google Images. I visit Eric from time to time, and we always talk about what happened there. I figured the best place to start is from the very beginning. This all started back when I was 16. I've always been extremely interested in urban exploration, especially to places that are abandoned with a colorful history, whether the building is condemned or out of commission, whatever the case may be. Being from Texas, there's plenty of opportunities to find places like this. This story, however, is about an orphanage called Woodman's Circle. This is a very real place. You can search it for yourself and read up on the history of it in case you don't believe what I'm saying is accurate. The orphanage is located in Sherman, Texas. Sherman is a very small town, probably less than 50,000 people. With not much else to look at, the orphanage piqued my interest. If you don't know it's there at night, it's easy to miss. Behind a long line of trees just east of the freeway, across a long courtyard, it stretches up into the darkness right before your eyes. From what I understand, it was intended for widows and orphan children, making it a seemingly ideal place to explore if you're looking to scare yourself a little bit. The building itself was abandoned sometime during the 1970s, and has had a couple fires since then. The property has been passed around to various owners over the years, certain private owners and a number of attorney groups. At the time of this story, the owners were a couple with some sort of trust corporation. There was no effort of maintenance or renovation, so basically, the building has sat rotting for close to 50 years now. Aside from a few no trespassing signs, nothing else had been added. Well, being 16, I looked at the warnings against entry as an invitation. I parked my car in a neighborhood about a mile down the road as to not raise the suspicion of any Johnny Q laws. During the walk to the orphanage, I was smoking cigarettes, listening to some Pink Floyd, simply trying to get myself into an already on-edge mindset. It was a decently warm night, but I still had a light jacket on just in case the exploration required me to crawl or something of that nature. I kept peering over my shoulder, starting to feel more and more uneasy. Not necessarily due to anything paranormal, but like a cop or some nosy person from the neighborhood had an idea of what my intentions were and was going to make it a point to mess up my plans. I decided to turn my music off so I could hear if someone or something was coming up behind me, also ensuring that if I heard a car coming I could duck just behind the tree line and hide for the possibility of it being a police car. It took about 15 minutes to make the mile-long walk before I could just make out the silhouette of the orphanage. I ventured into the tree line and came to a 3-strand barbed wire fence. I put my hands on the second line of barbed wire and pushed it down wide enough for me to slip through. As soon as I was through the barbed wire fence, I pulled my pack of Marlboros out of my jacket pocket, set a cigarette on my lips, pulled out my Zippo and lit it. And there before me laid Woodman's Circle. Now I want to make it clear that I don't believe in ghosts, or spirits, or anything of that nature. Not to say I couldn't ever believe in them, I've just never had any kind of experience that left me with no other explanation. When I first approached the main building, there's a staircase with maybe 10 to 15 steps leading up to the front door. At this point, I hadn't heard a car, or even the wind for that matter, for a couple of minutes now. The sheer silence was so acute that I could hear the tobacco popping in my cigarette. I'm not sure if anyone who reads this is a smoker, but to be able to hear your cigarette crackling, it has to be pretty damn quiet. I was also quite aware of my own breathing at this point. I could feel myself making a conscious effort to breathe as slowly and as smoothly as possible. I did my best to listen for anything, any sounds at all. Still, nothing. I started to step toward the front door, and realized at that moment exactly how loud my Converse were on the pavement. I tilted my feet to attempt to walk on the sides of my shoes the best I could. I tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. From what I could see, it wasn't nailed or boarded shut, so I kept trying. After a couple of attempts, I figured I wasn't going to be going in that way. Over to the left of the main building is another building. I could see that the door was wide open, so I decided to give that way a shot. As I walked to the other door, I gazed out over the courtyard, expecting to see a police officer walking across the grass ready to fine me for trespassing. However, I was still alone. I got to the second door and saw that it was pushed open about 3/4 of the way, enough for me to see clear down the hallway, all the way to the back of that particular building. It's hard to estimate, especially being as dark as it was, but I would guess the hallway itself was maybe 100 to 150 feet long and approximately 10 feet wide. I could see shadows of debris that littered the ground, and kept having the thought of one of those shadows starting to move floating around in my head. I do that to myself quite often. Think of the scariest outcome of scenarios that I'm in, and ponder the question of, what would I do? I walked into the hallway and made every attempt to silence my footsteps as much as possible. The ground was so cluttered and covered in dirt and rocks it made it impossible to stay completely quiet. I kept glancing from side to side, into every doorway that I came parallel with. I could see that they were rooms. They had bed springs, toilets, bathtubs, even little bits of clothing. At that moment, I was more interested than scared, but only for the moment. A feeling of dread was beginning to wash over me, so I decided to start walking down the hallway from the direction I came and head into the main part of the building. The streetlights made the main building somewhat easier to see on the inside. I didn't have a flashlight with me, and I was trying to use the light from my phone sparingly. I didn't want someone from the street seeing my light on in the building, essentially giving me away. I made it to the main building and spotted the front door I attempted to enter from earlier. I went to get a closer look. The door handle on the inside was the same as the outside. One of those handles with the little thumb latch on the top. To my utter shock, the door came open with ease. I couldn't believe it. I was sure the door was blocked in some way. Nails in the frame, cocked shut, something. But no. It was as easy as opening the front door to my own house. I decided to close it again as to not arouse suspicion. I turned and looked at the layout of the entryway. I had thought of the possibility that I may not be as alone as I thought. The door wasn't blocked by anything, and definitely wasn't locked. Even if it was, somebody would have had to have unlocked it, or moved whatever obstacle that was preventing it from opening out of the way in the same amount of time it took me to walk in from the side entrance. We're talking in the matter of 3 or 4 minutes here. It also would have had to have been done completely silently. I just didn't see how that was possible. I explained away the fear as I must have been opening the door wrong. Maybe it was one of those doors that when locked, can only be opened from the inside, like a public bathroom lock or something. Still, I found it at the very least eerie. There were a few doors visible, only one of which with enough light for me to navigate. I chose that one. I went to the door on my right and it led me to a small corridor. The corridor was Z-shaped, and it opened up into what appeared to be some sort of common room. There were plenty of windows to let light from the street seep in, so I glanced around to see if I could spot anything of interest. There was a dumbwaiter over to my left, so I went to check that out. The cart wasn't in the shaft, or at least not on this level, so I grabbed my phone for a little bit of light. I used my finger to cover the light so it wouldn't be visible from outside. I pointed my light up the shaft of the dumbwaiter and looked up. I could see what looked like the car, possibly stuck, at least 4 or 5 feet above my head. I looked down, and sitting on the bottom of the shaft was what I think were children's clothes. They were probably 3 or 4 feet below me, so I definitely couldn't reach them from where I was, so I honestly couldn't tell you if the clothes were modern or not. As far as I knew, they could have belonged to a kid that lived there during the time of the orphanage's operation. I left them be. I stood back up and looked around the common room again, still entertaining the idea of possibly having company lurking elsewhere in the building. I began to focus on the massive amounts of graffiti splattered all over the walls. Some of the ones I took note of were dated as far back as 1985. There could have been older examples, but none with dates on them. It blew my mind to think of people walking around this building, exploring through the rubble, and leaving behind graffiti 10 years before I was even born. While I was reflecting on the amount of time the building had just been sitting there, I heard something. It sounded like talking, but extremely muffled. I could tell there was more than one person, but I wasn't confident enough to guess if it was more than 2. I quickly turned my phone light off and tried to be as quiet as I could. From the sound of it, I thought it might be coming from somewhere behind the building. I started to make my way toward the back, which I could see some of due to the windows facing the rear of the building. As I got closer, I realized that the talking seemed to be coming from an actual room in the orphanage. I was in no way going to introduce myself, based on the fact that I don't know whoever it is. I can't tell if they're a threat, or if they're even aware of my presence at this point. I went through another door toward the back corner of the common room. It led me to another small hallway with a few doors on either side. There were 3 doors on the left and 2 on the right. This hallway probably led outside at some point, but it looked as though the door had been blocked or sealed off. I stood at the entrance of the hallway, listening. The conversation was down to a whisper, so I wasn't able to make out any words. I took another couple of steps into the hall and slowly gazed into the first room on my right. It was empty. I could tell that whoever was talking was on the right side of the hallway, so I knew they had to be in the room right next door to the one I was in. I poked my head out of the room for a better chance to hear. As soon as I looked around the corner of the door frame, I heard someone say very sharply, "Shh!" Crap. I stopped breathing. My whole body tensed up. I even tried to put my hand on my chest to keep my heart from beating too loudly. I started to weigh my options. Option 1. Just to ensure my safety, I could quickly turn on my phone light to improve my sight line, make a run for the front door just on the other side of the common room, sprint across the courtyard and into the street. At that point, I don't care who sees me. I just want to be out of there. Or, option 2, I could show myself. I know, it sounds freaking insane, but maybe if I show myself to whoever else is here, we can just have a big laugh about how scared we all were, and we can all leave comfortably. Who knows? Maybe they're as scared as I am. However, there were more of them than there were of me, at least by 1. I couldn't imagine them being as scared as me. I knew exactly how I would have felt had I had a couple of friends, or even just one friend there with me. I would have felt 10 times better knowing I have backup. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of the possibility that if I started to run, the fear would set in a million times more than it already has. I decided to go with option 2. I spent a few seconds gathering whatever courage I could muster. I spoke out. "Hello?" Silence. "Hello?" Again, silence. "Listen, I just came in here to take a look around. I can leave, though." Several seconds of silence. "Hello?" By now, it had been about 15 seconds with no response. I stepped out of the room I was in and looked around the corner of the doorframe to their room. Terrifyingly, the room was empty. Nothing to suggest there were people in there. I was in deafening silence again. Alone. I began to panic, so I grabbed my phone and turned my light on. I spun around to make a run for the front door, and right as I turned, I spotted someone sticking their head down out of a hole in the ceiling, smiling at me. I couldn't move. I felt like I was experiencing something akin to sleep paralysis. It didn't even feel like I was standing anymore, but more like there was some kind of feeling of horror that filled me up, and that's what was keeping me upright. It was definitely a person, not a ghost or apparition, but it seemed just a tad off. I don't know, like their smile was uncomfortably wide, and their eyes were unusually small and spaced apart. Before I could even conjure up another thought or emotion, I screamed. I rarely scream out of fear. Not saying I don't get scared. If someone jumped out at me, I would do the same thing most people do and take a really sharp breath in, but it's seldom that something scares me so much that I actually scream. I started to sprint to the door, not even using my phone light, with no regard to anything except escaping. I just ran. I made it to the front door and flung it open. Barely breaking stride, I scampered down the stairs, taking them 4 or 5 at a time. I ran across the courtyard and made it to the tree line. I grabbed hold of the barbed wire fence and turned my head to look over my shoulder. On the porch of Woodman Circle stood 3 people, I guess. They weren't doing anything, just standing there, staring at me. I couldn't make out their facial expressions, or even their facial features. All of a sudden, one of them began to scream. The scream sounded exactly like my scream, or at least the memory of the sound of my own scream still resonating in my head. I couldn't tell you if it was meant to be a mock, or a taunt, or if it was something else entirely. I just don't know. But I was still scared out of my mind, so I slipped through the barbed wire fence and ran straight to where I parked my car. Being a smoker, running wasn't my strong suit, but since I was only 16 and I hadn't been smoking for very long, I made the mile-long run to my car in probably less than 7 minutes. I hit the unlock button on my key fob, flung my door open, and jumped into my car. I locked my doors and started the engine and just sat there for a second. After about a minute, I put my car in drive and started the drive home. That is where my adventure that night ended. I have no idea what the hell happened, or who the hell those people were. I truthfully couldn't even say if they were people. I suppose it could have been something else, but I just can't bring myself to definitively say that that was the case. So a few friends, I think 3 of them in this specific instance, and I go ghost hunting, and check out weird places and stuff every now and then. We live out in Kentucky, where there's not much to do. Pretty rural areas. One night, we decided to check out this fairly old place that's a good 15 to 20 minute drive from one of my friends' places, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. They call it the Mercer House. I assume because some family with the last name Mercer lived there once. As far as I know, no murders or anything bad that would make it haunted happened. It's a 2 or 3, can't remember, I think it was 3, but the stairs were so rickety we didn't want to risk it by going up to the 3rd, story old wooden house in the middle of a field, and no one has lived there for quite a while. I don't know the exact number of years. Supposedly, some of the local meth heads go there for recreation every now and then, so 2 of us had bats in case we needed to fight off some drugged up hobos like in Condemned or something. So that possible threat was a little creepy, plus some other redneck family technically owns the land the house is on and is known for shooting first and asking later. though they never really go around the Mercer house. Due to the mud, it had rained really hard earlier, but was clear for the rest of the night. We could only pull up partly through the driveway, then had to park and walk the rest of the way, which was still a good 3 to 5 minutes or so. We like needlessly long drives in Kentucky. During the walk, we hear some coyotes howl, which was a little creepy, but they seemed pretty far away. As we approached the house, we noticed a cat. Kind of cute, actually. It was a bit dirty, but it looked nice. Not like those nasty, ear-bitten off, festering wounds, patches of fur missing type of homeless cats. It was pretty affectionate and didn't run from us, instead following us around. The front door was slightly ajar before we went in. The lock was smashed off anyway, so the wind could just as easily have blown it open, and we didn't think much of it. The cat followed us inside. The living room and kitchen were on the first floor and not that interesting, although thanks to the druggies, the living room had an interesting mix of old and semi-new, but junky and probably stolen furniture. I'm remembering that there was a door that led under the stairs, but it was either locked or blocked by something and we didn't want to disturb anything, so we left it alone. At the bottom of the stairs, sitting on the rail, was a small plastic bottle. It looked kind of scientific, like something you'd keep a sample in. There was a sticker label, but it was worn off and partially ripped, so if there was ever any writing on it, it was completely gone now. The bottle was filled with some kind of blue transparent liquid. One of our dumber friends uncapped it and took a whiff, but said it had no scent. We put the cap back on and left the bottle where we found it. We headed upstairs and there were a lot of smaller rooms, so we split up into 2 pairs. Like I said, 2 of us had bats, and 2 of us had flashlights, so it worked out. I'm not particularly creeped out by the dark, but I am creeped out by drug-addled rednecks trying to kill me, so I had one of the bats. The cat decided to follow my pair, so my friend and I went to check out one of the bedrooms. This one had a window, so a bit of moonlight was peering in and falling directly on a stack of newspapers. They were all old, from like the 1950s or something, which was pretty neat. I crouched down to read over the top one. I think the front page story was about a murder, which was interesting. My reading was interrupted by my friend behind me, who let out a sudden, "Crap!" I hopped up, prepared with my bat, and asked him what the hell his problem was, and he waved me over to the cabinet he was examining. He shined his light on the front of it where someone had carved the word, "Help," into the wood. I told him he was an idiot and someone was just messing with us, but he insisted up and down that the first time he looked over the cabinet, that wasn't there, and it showed up after he started checking it out. I still think he's full of crap, but he was certain of it. Right about that point, the cat, which had been following my friend mostly, decided it was bored and left the room. It sounds weird, but almost the exact moment the cat went around the doorway and left my line of sight, our flashlight's batteries died. We called the other guys over and all formed together back into one group since we only had the one light. The cat came back with the other 2 and continued to follow all of us. We looked around a bit more and decided to check out the bathroom. The shower had one of those classic old curtains. The guy with the flashlight was too much of a wuss, so I opened the curtain and immediately saw movement. Something small and dark was in the tub and moving around. It seemed slow and smooth, so I assumed it was a snake. Ghosts don't bother me, but screw snakes, so I decided we should call it a night, and we got the hell out pretty quick. As we left the place, the cat continued to follow us until we stepped off the front porch, where it sat down and stayed, still watching us. Once we got about 2 yards from the house, our other flashlight went out. We found an abandoned house in a little village near to where I live. We were a group of friends about 14 to 16 years old. No one knew who owned the house. It was just there. You had to climb over a 7-foot tall wall to get in. The garden was overgrown. It was just basically a dilapidated house. We set up a den in there, brought candles, etc., and took over a pigeon loft they had in the attic. Moved all our stuff from the previous den, in a hayloft, into this pigeon loft and generally secured it to stop anyone coming in. We moved all of our adult magazines and Bacardi, cigarettes, knives, slingshots, and anything else 14-year-old kids can't keep at home up into the attic. One day we went to the den and it looked as though someone had been inside, as the non-obvious way of getting into it had been used and had not been put back where it used to be. It was about 10:30, dark and cold, when me and two friends, Ben and Mark, went into the den. We sorted out the entryway and talked about what could/who could have been in. None of our group had been in, as we had all been at school all day. Mark or Ben lit the candles we had in there. You couldn't see the light from outside to keep it secret, and we had a Bacardi and shared a cigarette. The room was/is about 15 foot long by about 8 across and drops down into a similar sized room that is the second floor of the house. To get to where we had set up base, you had to climb up a plank of wood which we could remove when we were in the loft and close the hatch. There were no windows in the den. So with this in mind, I will tell you what happened next. We were about to play cards when I heard a scratching sound coming from the hatch. We weren't expecting anyone else, but we opened it, and there was just darkness below. The next couple of minutes were strange to say the least. There was a loud guttural shout that seemed to come from all the corners of the room at once, and the board we used as a door to the loft came up and flew to one side. The board was part of the way we got out of the attic, but we had to just dangle drop about 6 feet to get down with it gone into the room below. The voice came back again, but it sounded like whispers. Again, from all corners of the room at once. We looked at each other and decided to get the hell out. I kid you not about this next part. I have no reason to lie, and for the last 10 years or so we have discussed what happened and come up with no explanation. Although I think some of it is nerves/shadows. We made our way to the hatch and had to drop down into the room below with the plank/hatch covering gone. We always made sure to completely extinguish the candles, so one of us did that. At this point, what can only be described as a green neon sausage-shaped light and a ball of white light appeared in the room and moved from one corner to the other. Then the guttural cry sounded again. We collectively peed ourselves and dropped down into the room below, and then out into the garden. There were no apparitions of people or anything, just lights, but it was really strange. We sent 3 others back to the den to pick the stuff up and return it to the hay barn den. We didn't tell them about the lights/sounds until they came back. But nothing else happened. I don't know. What do you guys think? Hey guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Have you ever gone urban exploring? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, consider leaving a like and hitting that subscribe button. I post 3 times a week, so there will be no shortage of spooky content. As always, if you have any scary stories you'd like to be told, be sure to send them in. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fear Seekers. I'll see you in the next video.